On the 1st of December, 1948, a man was found dead on a beach in Adelaide, Australia. He was well dressed. Clean-shaven. Fit. No wallet. No ID. Every single label had been cut out of his clothes. In his pocket, investigators found a tiny scrap of paper, torn from the last page of a rare book of poetry. On it were 2 words in Persian, Tamam Shud. Finished. Ended. 75 years later, forensic scientists have used DNA testing to narrow down who this man might have been. But they still can't tell you why he died, or who wanted him dead. This is the story of the Somerton Man, one of the strangest unsolved cases in the world. It was early morning on Somerton Park Beach, just south of Adelaide. A local couple out for a walk noticed a man lying near the seawall, propped up as if resting. His legs were stretched out, his feet crossed. One arm rested on the sand. At first, nobody was alarmed. People slept on the beach all the time in summer. It wasn't until later that morning, when he still hadn't moved, that someone approached closely enough to realize he wasn't sleeping. He was dead. There were no obvious wounds. No signs of struggle. No blood. He looked almost peaceful, dressed in a smart, unusually formal outfit for a beach, a white shirt, tie, brown trousers, and a knitted pullover, despite the summer warmth. His shoes were highly polished, unusually clean for someone who supposedly walked on sand. When police searched him, what they didn't find was almost more disturbing than what they did. No wallet. No identification of any kind. No hat, even though nearly every man of that era wore one. And strangest of all, every single tag and label had been carefully removed from his clothing. Someone had gone out of their way to make sure this man could not be identified. An autopsy found his heart was enlarged, his spleen was unusually large, and there was congestion in his organs consistent with poisoning, but no poison was ever found in his system, despite exhaustive testing. The pathologist admitted he had never seen a death quite like it. Weeks later, police found something that seemed like a breakthrough, an unclaimed suitcase in the cloakroom of Adelaide railway station, checked in the day before the body was discovered. Inside was a strange assortment of items. A stenciling brush, of the kind used by ship crews to stencil cargo. A table knife cut down and sharpened into a tool. Thread that matched a repair on the dead man's coat, an unusual orange waxed thread not commonly used in Australia. And once again, almost every tag had been removed. The only clothing labels left intact had the name T. Keane, or Keane, but police quickly discovered these names were dead ends. No matching missing person named Keane was ever found. Whoever this man was, he, or someone helping him, had meticulously erased every trace of his identity, not just once, but twice, once on his body, and again in a suitcase he'd stashed elsewhere in the city. This wasn't a spontaneous death. This looked like preparation. Months after the body was found, an investigator made a discovery that would define this case forever. Tucked into a small, hidden fob pocket sewn inside the dead man's trousers, a pocket so small it had been missed in the initial search, was a tiny rolled-up scrap of paper. Printed on it were 2 words, Tamam Shud. Police traced the paper to a rare first edition of a Persian poetry collection called the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, a philosophical poem about living life to the fullest, since death comes for everyone. The words, Tamam Shud, appear on the very last page. They mean, it is ended, or simply, finished. The scrap in the dead man's pocket had clearly been torn from a specific copy of that exact book. And then, remarkably, that exact copy turned up. A man came forward saying he'd found a copy of the Rubaiyat in the back seat of his unlocked car, parked near the beach, around the time of the death. The torn corner matched perfectly. But it's what was written inside that book that turned this from a strange death into a legend. On the back inside cover of the book, faintly visible under ultraviolet light, was a phone number, leading police to a local nurse who lived not far from where the body was found. "We'll come back to her." But beneath that phone number was something stranger, 5 lines of capital letters, seemingly random, arranged like a code. Investigators sent it to Australian Naval Intelligence, cryptographers, and codebreakers across the country. Some concluded it was a genuine cipher, possibly related to espionage, given Cold War tensions and Adelaide's proximity to a sensitive rocket testing facility at the time. Others believed it was simply the first letters of remembered phrases, a common mnemonic device, and not a true code at all. To this day, no one has definitively cracked it. Amateur codebreakers and professional cryptographers still attempt it regularly, and university cryptography courses have used it as a teaching example of how genuinely hard unsolved ciphers are. It remains one of the most famous unbroken codes connected to a real unsolved death anywhere in the world. The phone number in the book led detectives to a woman living close to the beach, a former nurse. When shown a plaster cast made of the dead man's face, she reportedly reacted with visible shock, though she denied knowing him. She never explained her reaction. She refused to speak further with police about the case for the rest of her life. Some researchers believe she knew exactly who the Somerton Man was and chose to take that secret to her grave. She passed away in the 2000s without ever revealing what she knew. Her family later became central to the case in an unexpected way, because for decades, one theory suggested the dead man may have secretly fathered her son. Over 75 years, 3 main theories have dominated. The spy theory. Adelaide in 1948 sat near Woomera, a top-secret rocket and weapons testing range central to Cold War tensions between the West and the Soviet Union. A man with no identity, a possible cipher, and an untraceable poison would fit perfectly into a Cold War espionage story. The love triangle theory. Some researchers believe the man was connected personally to the nurse, perhaps a former lover, or the biological father of her child, and that his death was tied to a private, painful secret rather than international intrigue, the unidentified drifter theory. The simplest explanation, a lonely man, isolated from any family, who deliberately erased his own identity before taking his own life in a symbolic, literary way, fitting, given that the book's message is literally about accepting death. For decades, none of these could be proven. Then, in 2022, an Australian professor using genetic genealogy, the same method used to catch the Golden State Killer, extracted DNA from the plaster cast and hair samples preserved from the original investigation. The results pointed to a name, Carl Charles Webb, an electrical engineer born in Melbourne in 1905. Even with a possible name, the deepest mysteries remain completely unsolved. Why did Carl Webb end up on that beach, with every trace of his identity deliberately removed? What killed him, if it wasn't a substance detectable by 1940s or even modern toxicology? What do the 5 lines of code actually mean? And why did that local nurse react with such fear to his face, a reaction she carried silently to her grave? DNA can give you a name. It can't give you a motive, and it can't decode a message that may have been designed never to be broken. The Somerton Man's grave in Adelaide is now marked, no longer simply, unknown. But the case file is still open. And somewhere, that 5-line message is still waiting for someone to finally read what it says. If you think you can crack the Somerton Man's code, drop your theory in the comments below. I read every single one. And if you want more of the world's strangest unsolved mysteries, subscribe to Unsolved Cases, because we post a new deep dive every week.